All right, it is time for us to begin a brand new chapter in Volume 2 of the XNA Extreme 101 class. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at XNA framework. Now, we have exposed you to the XNA world in the past. If you recall, back in Volume 1, we recreated the canon game inside the XNA environment. And in order to do that, we needed to provide a very basic overview of the XNA framework. We exposed you to the game class that was created for you when you created a Windows XNA game. We went in there, we talked about each of the methods that were available. We took a look at things like the load graphics content, unload graphics content. We took a look at, what else we have? Initialize, the two big ones, update and draw. And then we put all those methods to good use by putting our own code in there and making a very simple but functioning game. It was good stuff. But to be honest with you, if you think about it, you don't know what's happening under the hood. How did that window get created? Where did that come from? I mean, because there is a window, obviously, but there was nothing in the code within the game class that we got that said anything about a window. How about the game loop? Where's the game loop at? How does update get called? How does draw get called? How do you control the timing? Where does all that stuff exist? That is the idea of this section, along with some other things that we're going to talk about in just a second. So, XNA framework. We're going to begin with an overview of the XNA framework. What we need to do is take a look at all of the assemblies that gets installed on your computer when you install the XNA framework. We're going to take a look at all the DLLs, and we're going to give you a very generic overview of what they do. Now, there's a lot of functionality, a lot of classes that exist within the assemblies. There's a lot of different types available, and it would take us forever to go through every single thing. So it's just going to be a very general overview. Right, Logan?
Right. We're going to show things that would be most important. Just point out the fact that a lot of common types that we've been using do, in fact, exist.
Yeah, where they come from.
Now, like you said, the entire package is very comprehensive, so we're not going to cover every single last thing contained within.
Exactly, unless we want to turn this into a 300-hour video series just for this one section. And we don't want to do that, obviously. So, plus, let's not forget the key thing. This is an introduction to the XNA framework. Okay, so once we've talked about the assemblies, and we know what gets set up on your computer when you install XNA, we're then going to turn our attention to a little application called Reflector. Reflector is a very powerful application that allows us to take a look into assemblies and see code. So if you have an application that is a .NET application, you have the ability to look inside of it, as long as it hasn't been, what's the word I'm looking for here, Logan?
Obfuscated.
Yeah, exactly. But as long as it hasn't been kind of encrypted, right? I'm just trying to think of a very generic term at the moment. I didn't want to scare him with big words.
As long as this type of viewing is intentionally prevented.
There you go. That sounds great. Then you can actually see the code. So believe it or not, using Reflector, you could have gotten your hands on any of the applications that anyone else that's been going through Volume 1 or Volume 2 has written and looked in and taken a peek at the code that they've written. Okay? So the cool thing about this is we can turn around and use Reflector for all of the XNA assemblies themselves and see what's going on under the hood. So we're going to show you where to get Reflector, how to get it set up on your computer, and then we're going to turn around and use it on the DAG application that we wrote in Knowledge Review 7. And with that, that's going to allow us to, we can show you all the methods that you should be, well, still very familiar with as you just got finished writing it. So once we have a basic understanding of how to use Reflector, we're then going to turn around and create a simple Windows XNA game. We're not going to put any of our own code in it, just the basic template that we're given. And then we're going to use Reflector to take a look under the hood and start seeing where these classes come from. So we have the Game 1 class that's presented to us when we have our basic game template that gets laid down and ready for us to start typing code, which inherits from game. And then where does game inherit from? Or where are their associations made? Like, not necessarily game inheriting from anyone, but from the fact that game has got a host that's referencing a game host, and that's referencing something else, and how it all basically all ties together, because there are two key things that we're looking at picking up when we look at what's going on under the hood. And that is, number one, where does the window come from? Because there is a game window. And number two, the game loop, as I mentioned earlier. Where does the game loop come from? These two things, we want to actually see it. Like I said, remove all the magic and see where these things come from. So that's the whole idea of under the hood, using Reflector to track all that stuff down. So once we know what's going on there, There's no longer any magic whatsoever involved in the XNA game. Then what we're going to do is turn our attention to the creation of an XNA game from scratch. We're going to create a console application, not a Windows XNA game, but a console application, and create all of our own code that's going to give us an XNA game. With this lesson, you're going to quickly find out the importance of the content pipeline. From there, we're going to turn our attention over to 3 key elements that you're going to be relying on. This is going to really create the foundation of what you're going to be doing throughout the rest of your career in XNA. We're going to start out by taking a look at the sprite batch class, how you can go about loading in textures and getting those textures drawn to your screen. So we'll start out with simple graphics in XNA. So you've heard us mention the word sprite before. If you don't know what sprite means, but you know that you were loading in, a target or a little ship and a projectile, don't worry. In this video, we're going to really break it down for you. From there, we're going to move into the world of text. How do we draw text to the screen and control it? After we take a look at drawing text, we're then going to take a look at input handling. So important for our applications. How can you have a game that you play if you didn't have any input handling? You just stare at it. So we're going to talk about the keyboard. We're going to take a look at the mouse. And then finally, we're going to look at the gamepad. With an understanding of these 3 guys, oh man, we're set up to do all sorts of stuff. And then finally, we'll wrap up this section of videos with a knowledge review. But this time around, the knowledge review will not be anywhere near as sophisticated as it was in the last section. The last section, that knowledge review was really important because we were just wrapping up Object-Oriented Programming 1 and Object-Oriented Programming 2, and the entire foundation of Object-Oriented Programming had been presented. And so we really needed to give you an application that utilized all of the stuff we showed you. And the DAG application really was a great example of it. It just kind of tied all the loose ends up and said, here's how it all works together. Well, now at this point, since you should have a relatively comfortable working knowledge of object-oriented programming, in this section it's really all about the XNA framework and getting ourselves set up for creating our first real XNA game. So the knowledge review is just going to be some simple challenges where you're going to need to call upon some of your past skills in order to solve some things inside of the world of XNA. So very simple XNA game with some interesting challenges. That'll wrap up this whole section. At that point, we'll then transition over to the next section where we will begin the precision game. And that's where things are going to become quite intense because it's a pretty big game that we're going to be putting together. It's simple, but there's a lot going on, and it's going to really put to use everything you've been shown throughout all of Volume 1 and Volume 2. So that's a quick overview of this particular section. It's going to be a lot of fun. With that, let's go ahead and get started.